There's a tension that Christians feel between their earthly life and their spiritual life. And, or most Christians feel that. And the more I think about it, I think it's an inherent tension. There is the earthly life and the spiritual life are two different lives, and that's a pretty common theme in the Gospels, and certainly in the letters after the Gospels. How do we live a spiritual life on earth? And there are difficulties in that. And I've come to the conclusion, as I said, first, that it's inherent, that it's not accidental. Secondly, I've seen this. It shows up in two ways, I think. That in lay people's lives, the spiritual life interferes with their earthly life. But with religious, it works the opposite way, that their earthly life interferes with the spiritual life that they're trying to live. Now, I'm talking about religious who are serious about living a religious life, and I'm talking about lay people who realize their commitment to the earthly life, to the world. Right? And it's by definition, really, the religious, by definition, are leading a religious life. And lay people, by definition, belong to the world in some way, right? And I would even go this far. If a Christian, especially a Catholic, does not feel any tension between the practice of their religion and their work and their life in the world, they're not practicing their religion very seriously. Or it's possible, I guess, that some have just have so much control over their lives that they can order it however they want, That tension shows up today in the gospel. Jesus goes to Bethany 6 days before Passover, and he had raised Lazarus from the dead already, and they were giving a dinner for Jesus there. And Mary, while Martha is serving the dinner, Mary breaks out a liter of genuine aromatic nard, and she anoints Jesus' feet and then dries his feet with her hair. Judas takes offense at this and says, "Why was this not sold and the money given to the poor?" Now we know from the gospel, John tells us, that Judas' concern was not really with the poor. It's just that he held the money bag and used to steal from the contributions. But let's say his concern really was for the poor. I mean, there are many people who have a genuine concern for the poor. And Jesus does not take Judas' side. He takes Mary's side. And this is interesting. Think about this. This costly nard could have been 300 days' wages, Judas says. Picture this. If you decided to donate a year's salary to the parish so that I could get new pews, which we need, I could get a new altar that goes back to what the original altar was for this place, new vestments, different things for worship. People would look at you and ask some questions. What? That's a lot of money, Or you hear this all the time. Why not sell all that great artwork in the Vatican? We could be billions or trillions of dollars and give that money to the poor. So here are a couple of the problems with it. Number one, although we are to have concern for the poor and the widow and the foreigner, those are clear things in the Old Testament, and Jesus continues them in the New as well. They are not the most important thing. Remember Jesus, when he's asked what the important commandments are, what the most important, he says the first commandment is love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, those two things are not in tension, but they are in order. And so if you really want to become a person who loves the poor, love God first. Be transformed by your relationship with God. Believe me, God will send you to the poor soon enough. But the trouble with loving your neighbor first is that it's easy to forget God. There are a couple of examples of this. One in the mid-20th century, there was the example of the worker priest, as it was called. And I'll just read this for you to give you a little synopsis. Worker priest was a missionary initiative by the Catholic Church in France, in particular, for priests to take up work in such places as car factories to experience the everyday life of the working class. I think the first priest to do this was actually on the docks or something. A worker priest was any priest who was freed from parochial work, in other words, parish work, by his bishop, lived only by full-time labor in a factory or other place of work, and was indistinguishable in appearance from an ordinary working man. Now, I have no idea, I have no problem, or I know, what should I say? I'm convinced that this idea was well-meaning. I am not impugning the motives of anyone. But what happened is, it just didn't work. Priests let go of their priestly work and truly became, as this says, indistinguishable in appearance from an ordinary working man. And so much so that it was just a few years, I don't know, not even 10 years later, of the 90 priests who were working as worker priests, 10 of them had gotten married, 15 were working with the communists, and many of them were involved in a violent uprising and industrial strikes and such. When the religious doesn't put the religious first, he loses or she loses the religious. In our own time, now this is arguable, and please don't send me a bunch of emails about this, but many of our religious orders after Vatican II became so concerned with social justice issues that they lost the charism of their communities. And some would argue that that's part of the reason that the communities are dwindling so much. So Pius XII eventually suppressed this movement and ordered all priests back to the parishes. See, there's something about acknowledging God first. And Jesus' answer to Judas is interesting. He said, "Leave her alone. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." And the tension for lay people that the spiritual gets in the way of the earthly life. I don't mean to imply by that you're not as holy or as spiritual as any priest or religious. What I mean is that your work is really in the world. But what do we do with Jesus' answer? What does that mean, you always have the poor with you? Here's what I think it means. What I think it means is that evil will never be eradicated from this earth. Yes, Jesus has won the victory over evil, but evil still prevails on earth and always will. We will not have a life without evil until we live that life in heaven with Jesus. Now, it doesn't mean that you give up on it. It doesn't mean that you don't fight evil, confront it. You do, by all means. First in ourselves, we battle against evil, but we also battle against the evil of the world, the injustices of the world. But if you think somehow a ton of money is going to fix all the evils in the world, you're wrong. And so the idea is not that we divert all the money in the church to the evils of the earth. No. First, we worship God, and that's our primary focus. And then we leave. See, first we go to Mass, right? And then the Mass is ended. Go in peace. You're sent out. Right? You can't give what you don't have. So you turn to God first in prayer and in love. And you're filled with graces, right? And you're filled with the love of the poor, love of the afflicted. And then he sends you out to do something about it. And now here's the problem with this tension. How do I resolve it? How much money should I give to the church? How much money should I keep for my own use? How much of my time is given here or there? The truth is, those are questions that each person has to answer for her or his own. I can't tell you how much money to give to the parish. I can't tell you how much time should be spent doing this, that, or the other thing. What I can tell you is put God first in your life and then ask God where God wants you to serve in the world. And don't expect that evil in the world is ever going to be completely eradicated until Jesus comes again. But we can engage the evils of the world as we see them. We'll always have evil with us, in the poor, in the sick, in the evils that people are doing, like abortion or unfair, immoral wars or whatever. But we face those with the grace that we receive from God. So part of my prayer for you always is that you will get closer to God and discover your purpose in the world. Right? And if you think you're being too extravagant with God, believe me, if I ever see that, I'll tell you. Okay? If I see you spending too much time here, I'll tell you. If I see that you're giving me too much money, I'll let you know, right? But this is your decision. And think about, seriously, this question. You will always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. And so let's get our priorities straight. God bless you.